Let's talk.
James Brown.
Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell's Bloody Dangerous is a powerful and inspiring portrait of bravery in action. I am delighted to say I am joined by the gentleman, nay, the legend. That is Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell. Colin, good afternoon from Spain, sir.
Did you say good afternoon?
It is afternoon in Spain this afternoon. It's just on 12:30 in Marbella.
Well, it's good morning in Sidcup. So, but anyway, it doesn't matter one way or another. It's good to speak with you. I'm glad to see you've got headphones on, and I can see my wingman Mark Vickers smiling away down below, and I'm sure that we're going to have a very innovative and enjoyable conversation.
Can I just say, I read a book called Pathfinders last year. There's a photograph of you in it somewhere in the States, I think before you went back to the UK. Tell me a little bit about how you became a Pathfinder.
Well, Will Iredale wrote this fabulous book called Pathfinders, and I appeared on TV with him, with the gorgeous Caroline Hawkins, to give him a boost for his book, and I believe it worked very well. It's a super book, a super author, and now it's gone full circle. I've now appeared on BBC boosting my own book, Bloody Dangerous. And as a result, it's now moved up to #1 bestseller on Amazon. In fact, the last I heard was that Amazon had run out of books and my publishers are madly commissioning reprints.
So what was, when you first saw the Mosquito aircraft, what was it like to fly? Because it is the most beautiful and most iconic aircraft of the world, in my opinion.
Well, your opinion is shared by me. It was a fantastic aircraft. I once flew in a Spitfire, and when I climbed out of the cockpit, and inevitably someone said to me, "And how does this compare with the Mosquito?" And I replied, well, there's nothing that the Spitfire can do that the Mosquito can't do. They're both fully aerobatic, but the Mosquito has got 2 Spitfire engines, so as American cousins would say, no contest. Also, incidentally,
yeah.
I've never driven a Ferrari, but I imagine that driving a Ferrari is rather like piloting a Mosquito.
Because when you came to fly the Mosquito, you needed a navigator. And I heard a story about how your navigator was picked. Were you just left alone and there were 100 of you, 50 of you pilots, 50 of you navigators, and you had to sort of double up?
Yes, well, we were asked to do this by some wing commander, and he said, "I'll come back in an hour's time, and I will expect you all to have crewed up, 1 pilot, 1 navigator." And some guy jumped up on a stool and said, "Who wants a drunken navigator?" And I said, "Well, I don't want him," because I was looking for a good, reliable navigator. Well, people were crewing up all over the place. Nobody seemed to want me, and I didn't see anybody I particularly wanted until I looked across the room and I saw this rather serious-looking individual sitting at a table with a Canada flash on his shoulder. And he looked old to me. He must have been all of 28. And yes, well, there we are. You see, I was about 23. And I walked up to him and said, "Have you found yourself a pilot?" And he said, "No." And I said, "What's your experience?" And he said, "What's yours?" And I said, "Well, I've been an instructor to American and British cadets over in the USA, and now I've been released and I'm back here." "Ah," he said, looking a bit mollified. He said, "Well, I've been an instructor, a navigation instructor in Canada." And I said, "Congratulations, you found yourself a pilot." And I, in fact, achieved, secured a navigator that was not only probably the best on the squadron, but probably the best in the group. He was absolutely brilliant. He was not much fun, but then I wasn't looking for a navigator who was fun. I was looking for a bloody good navigator, and I got one. And I told him that I was exceedingly pleased to have him as a navigator, and I was lucky to have him. And then I said modestly, "But you're probably lucky to have me."
But you did, I mean, it was a team effort, and 50 raids into Germany, 13 over Berlin, and that must have been terrifying, not because of the night fighters, but because of the flak, the anti-aircraft, those huge towers that they had in Berlin. What was it like for the first time into Berlin?
Well, it was a bit hairy, wasn't it? It was... have you fallen off your chair?
Yes, I have. A bit hairy.
Yeah. Well, nobody likes being shot at. And as you approach Berlin, you would be coned by searchlights, and you'll be given a hell of a belting all the way into Berlin with anti-aircraft guns firing at you all the time, and over Berlin and out of Berlin. So, yes, it was bloody dangerous, and that's the title of my book.
Wasn't there a shell that stopped everything? Didn't you find yourself basically in a mosquito glider? And Doug said, "What do we do now?" Is that in the book?
Ah, that famous occasion when a shell burst underneath us and lifted us up, and we lost power on both engines. It was at this point my navigator, who was a pretty sort of stable character, leaned across to me and said, "What do we do now?" Which I thought was a bloody stupid question. And I said, well, we wait, don't we? Because that's all we could do. And then after what seemed like 6 months, but I suppose it was about a minute and a half, hallelujah, the power came back on, and I was able to take the aircraft away from Berlin. And then I had this famous exchange with him. I leaned across to him and I said, "Doug," because that was his name, "you weren't frightened, were you?" And he said, "No, I wasn't frightened. I was bloody terrified." And but that was Doug, you see. Lovely man. As I said, he was a brilliant navigator, didn't laugh much, hadn't got much sense of humour, I subsequently had, after I finished my tour, I subsequently had navigators with significant sense of humour, but they weren't much good as navigators.
Don't you have the special ability to sleep anywhere? And I've heard stories that you used to you said the Mosquito could fly itself in a straight line, so you would just set the trim.
That's perfectly true. If you trimmed up a Mosquito at 25,000 feet, so it would neither climb nor descend nor veer off to the left or veer off to the right, once you'd trimmed it up, it would virtually fly itself. It was almost as if it was on autopilot, but we hadn't got autopilots. But having trimmed it up, I used to carry a little pillow with me, and I used to say to my navigator, I'm going to have a nap. And I used to put my head down and have a little cat nap. And I said to him, if we veer off course, give me a nudge. And if we get back to base, and I said, give me a bigger nudge and I'll land the bloody thing.
There is maybe some of a different generation haven't realized the importance of Bomber Command. There was controversy, of course, about, it's civilians, it was cities. These weren't important targets. I think that people don't understand how vital the role of Bomber Command was in the Second World War.
No, well, let me make the point that the entire purpose of Bomber Command was to destroy the German capability, manufacturing capability of attacking us. And I think Bomber Command did a pretty good job. There was an attack on Peenemünde by Lancasters, and they caused so much havoc that when the commandant of Peenemünde, who was lunching with Hitler, heard about it, he hot-footed it down to Peenemünde to see what had happened. And when he surveyed the damage, he was so overcome that he dropped down in a fit and expired, which I found deeply satisfying.
Because if we hadn't have bombed the industrial centres, the Germans could have continued to wage war, and obviously, the outcome of the war could have been very, very different.
Well, that's very true. And if it hadn't been for the heroism of Fighter Command in 1940, we would have probably been subjugated by the Germans, and they had very nasty plans as to what they were going to do if they once got control over here. I think one of the German ministers said, as soon as we've beaten England, we will take able-bodied men across to Germany for slave labour. We shall destroy the young and the old, and we will put a number of suitable women into stud farms where they will be sired by picked Germans. And he said within about 10 years, because they will be producing children every year, in about 10 years, the British nation as we know it would cease to exist. Well, if you... that was rather a daunting prospect, wasn't it? Mm. So, hooray for Lord Dowding and Fighter Command, because if he hadn't been successful, Bomber Command would never have come into existence.
How did you react when you came face to face with the Messerschmitt 262, the jet? What was your reaction?
Well, thank God I never came face to face with him. It was a dirty night over Berlin. I was in cloud and rain, and the object of the ME262 was to get a visual on you, even in those bad conditions. So he was operating air-to-air radar to get a visual on me. And once he got a visual on me, I would have been dead. Because the firepower of an ME262 was simply enormous. One single blast and you turned into confetti, red confetti. And but when he turned on his air-to-air radar, I got a device at the back of the Mosquito that put a signal up on my instrument panel, which was a white light. And as soon as this happened, I dropped the aircraft down 10,000 feet to get out of his radar. And my navigator, Doug, said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you saw the white light, I assume." He said, "Yes, but..." He said, I've heard that there's ghosting and that sometimes you get the white light when it isn't really an ME262 at all. And I said, "You want me to hang around and find out?" Which quietened him down a bit. And every now and then I would have to take evasive action to get the white light to go out. But I was never able to convince my navigator that it was a genuine ME262 interception. But many years later, after the war, I met that wonderful character, Winkle Brown, who knew everything and everybody and had flown literally every aircraft ever produced. And when I told him of the incident, he said to me without hesitation, "You're bloody lucky to be alive." And then a little later on, I was interviewed by some guy from the Times, and I talked to him about the incident. And when he wrote it up in the Times, he said, Flight Lieutenant Bell was not only intercepted by the ME262, but he said a number of Mosquitoes were intercepted and many of them were shot down. And I phoned up this guy and said, "Hey, just a moment, I didn't say anything like that." He said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I got it independently from the Ministry of Defence." So, I wish Doug had been alive because I would have confronted him with this, but sadly, he died a number of years ago.
I believe you had the opportunity to meet, was it a German pilot and also somebody you thought was a paratrooper as well after the war?
Ah, yes, perfectly true. Dan Snow phoned me up on one occasion and said, "Would you like to meet a Luftwaffe pilot? We've got him over here at Big Hill, and we're going to give him a trip in a Spitfire. So would you like to meet him?" And I said, "No, not much." And he said, "Oh, well, come on now." He said, "The war's been over a long time. He's a decent little bloke. And anyway, you'll get a free meal." Well, anybody that knows me knows I'm always up for a free meal. And so I said, "Okay." And so in due course, I arrived at Biggin Hill, and one of Dan Snow's assistants greeted me and said, "I'll take you over to meet the Luftwaffe pilot." And he pointed him across the other side of the hangar. And as we walked towards this little guy, the assistant said to me, "You know, he's had 40 kills." I said, "I don't want to meet him." And he said, "Well, it was on the Eastern Front." "Oh," I said, "the Russians, that doesn't count." And so I met up with him, and he was, you know, he could speak English perfectly. And he said, "You were doing your job and I was doing mine." And I said, "Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. But of course, you see, it wasn't quite as simple as that. The Luftwaffe were okay, but behind them they'd got the Gestapo, and behind the Gestapo there were execution squads. So, I always regarded the Germans as a very dangerous adversary, and well, there we are. But I shook hands with him, and photographs were taken, and then somebody said, would you like to meet the German paratrooper? And I said, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So where is he? And they pointed across the other side of the hangar, and I saw this rather elderly, menacing character, and I walked across to him, and I looked at him and I said, I gather you are the ex-German paratrooper. And he said, no, I'm not. I'm Ted the taxi driver. So I got the wrong man. Right. There we are. That's life. C'est la vie.
Yeah.
And
final question. What are you hoping that people will enjoy or learn about Bloody Dangerous?
Well, I hope the reader, and I hope anybody that's listening to this exchange between you and me will learn, if he hasn't learned it already, that the most important thing, that the first priority for any country and government is defence. Without defence, you have nothing. So defence should rank above national health, it should rank above pensions, it should rank above damn nearly everything. And any government that fails to recognise this is, in my opinion, failing in its duty. But, of course, the trouble is, the people in this country haven't been educated sufficiently about the importance of defence. A poll was taken recently, and defence came at number 8 on the list of priorities in the eyes of the general public. Now, 2,000 years ago, a Roman general said, if you want peace, prepare for war. And what he meant was that if you're sufficiently strong, nobody is going to attack you, and so therefore you will enjoy peace. But unfortunately, this is not understood as it should be understood, and every time the Treasury wants to save money, they cut back on defence, which is absolute lunacy. I wish the bean counters in the Treasury would understand that it's much cheaper to spend money on defence than it is to spend money on a war. But there we are. I just been preaching this message for God knows how long. I hope it's not falling on deaf ears altogether, but I'm afraid there are a lot of deaf ears in the country at the present time.
The book is called Bloody Dangerous. It's by Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell. Colin, you've been bloody marvellous. Thank you for your time today.
Hi, Giles. It's great to have spoken with you. And all credit to my wingman, Mark Vickers, who is the greatest supporter that any man could possibly have. Thank you.